Let's talk to Mark Harper. He's chairman of the Coronavirus Recovery Group of backbench Tory MPs and former chief whip, and joins us now. Good morning to you, Mark.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning. It's almost when every time I go to speak to you, I always think we're going to be talking about a topic which we thought about the day before, and then more stories always arise, and there are so many that I want to talk to you about this morning. Let's start with pubs, because this was something the Prime Minister had to say about in front of the liaison committee of the chairs of all the various select committees in the House of Commons yesterday. Really quite casual about, well, it could be up to the landlords, and it was not a totally alien concept, the idea of people having to prove their COVID status to get into the pub. Do you think he's right, and that actually it would be perfectly reasonable for pub landlords, or indeed anyone else running a private business, to demand that people showed their private medical records in order to use their services?
No, Julia, I agree with the Prime Minister, but I think I agree with the Prime Minister of February last month, when he said that he didn't think that having papers to go to the pub was a very good idea, and had a huge number of ethical, practical and moral consequences. So he said it yesterday that the government's actually just started a very detailed piece of work on this. And I hope very much that when they think it through and they look at all the considerations, they actually decide not to pursue it. I don't think it's a very good idea at all. I can see there's some merit in what was set out earlier about requiring people in health and social care to be vaccinated, where you're dealing with very vulnerable people. And we already do that in healthcare to some extent, but to expect people as they're going about their normal lives, going to the pub, going to the shops or whatever, to have to prove their vaccination status, so I don't think is necessary. I think once we've vaccinated those that are most vulnerable, which we're very close to having done now, and they're protected from serious disease and hospitalisation and death, I think we can then get rid of those restrictions and get pretty much back to normal. And I haven't heard a very good argument for introducing them.
This is the bizarre thing, because we're told the vaccination programme, which has been a magnificent success from the government, and we can see how bad it could have been by what's happening over the channel in the EU, but it's been a magnificent success in terms of ordering them, rolling it out, making sure that people have trust in the vaccine. It's more effective than anyone hoped in every possible way, and it's had a better rollout than anyone hoped. So, I mean, tick on all accounts. But we're told this is the route out. Why on earth would we still need to have testing? And why on earth would people who've had the vaccine, who've got that coverage and that protection, why would they be concerned that someone sitting on the other side of the pub from them haven't?
Well, those are very good questions, Julia, and I haven't heard very good answers to them, to be honest. And it was interesting this morning, I've heard somebody from a big player in the pub industry, very dismissive of the idea, said he didn't think he'd introduced them himself, and set out a number of very cogent reasons around discrimination, around the challenges to actually just doing it operationally, about why it's not a very good idea. So I hope when the government thinks about this and thinks it through, that it actually recognises that actually there are lots of both moral, practical and ethical issues, and actually doesn't proceed with it any further.
And we know an awful lot of those in the hospitality industry, as you say. We're going to talk to Hugh Osman from Punch Taverns, are not keen on this. But again, we are looking at that, in terms of passports, COVID passports for travel, as mentioned earlier, Spain reopening, possibly, and Greece reopening, saying, they welcome us. Of course, we still currently are not allowed to leave the country. It is a criminal offence to even be in an airport with an intention to leave the country. And that's all possible under the emergency powers, which MPs are going to vote on tonight. And without a shadow of a doubt, there will not be a rebellion that's going to be big enough to stop that vote going through, given the support from opposition MPs or abstentions from Labour, if that's what they do. Why on earth, have you been given any information about why on earth the government would need to extend emergency coronavirus powers all the way to October, when the vaccination rollout plan means that all adults will be vaccinated by August, and the vaccination is the route out of this?
No, I haven't, Julia. I mean, two things on what you've just said. First of all, part of the reason why this is very difficult is the Labour Party is completely absent from this debate. It's the biggest question facing the country, and they're not even on the pitch. They're not even on the sidelines, actually, and are completely ineffectual. They're not even asking any of these challenging questions of the government. So that's why we're asking these questions, because I think they need to be asked. So the Prime Minister's been clear he wants restrictions to have ended by the middle of June, and yet the government's extending some very significant pieces of legislation all the way until October, legislation which it itself describes as extraordinary that you wouldn't have in normal circumstances. And I haven't heard a very good reason why very extensive police powers, for example, to indefinitely detain people, which have been used incorrectly on a number of occasions, are being rolled forward by 6 months. I haven't heard a very credible reason for that, which is why I won't be supporting them today. I'll be voting against them.
Well, how big might that rebellion be? We know there'll be some Labour MPs. We said there might be abstentions from the Labour Party. But how many MPs do you expect will actually join you in that rebellion?
Well, I honestly don't know, Julia. We haven't been whipping it. We haven't been doing a head count. We've been just setting out our arguments on these subjects with colleagues. And obviously, individual MPs are going to have to make their own decisions today, both on the roadmap, which is obviously directionally welcome, but we think it could safely go more quickly to save jobs and save businesses, but also on the extension of these powers through to October. And MPs will have to make up their own minds. But I can't really give you a good steer on the numbers, I'm afraid.
And in terms of where we go forward, you and your group have, saying you accepted that the vaccination rollout was absolutely crucial to getting out of this. Mm-hmm. And the government published their exit strategy. We finally got that on the February the 22nd. We've got all these dates. You, no doubt, like me and many others listening, have got those dates in their diary with the question mark. Pubs reopen, question mark. Or, going on a foreign holiday, question mark. Do you think that the data that we've seen so far, and the Prime Minister's always said data, not dates, do you think the data suggests that not only should we not be extending that, and those dates should be absolutely not at the earliest possible date, but the latest possible date? Do you think that actually we should be moving sooner rather than later?
Well, I do. You'll remember when we've had previous discussions, we've always said that once you've vaccinated the most vulnerable, the top 9 groups, which the government is absolutely on track to do by the middle of April, and the protection from that first dose, which is where most of the protection comes from, will kick in by then, we would be in a position to remove restrictions at the end of April. And some information in newspapers this morning, the government's own modelling shows a dramatic fall in the number of deaths, the number of people that we're going to see in hospital and being admitted to hospital over the next few weeks. So I think the government could safely bring forward some of that roadmap. And I think that will be incredibly important for those people whose jobs and businesses won't otherwise survive. And we saw this week massive impact on younger people. They've had 85% of the job losses have fallen on younger age groups, and they're the ones most worried about their futures. And I think we owe it to them. They've locked themselves away for the last year to protect older people. They don't suffer from this disease. And I think we owe it to them to get the economy open so that their futures are not permanently damaged.
Can I also ask you just finally about the EU situation, all these threats, the European Commission basically saying, the EU has exported all these vaccines to the UK. The UK has not exported any back to them. And the prospect of this blockade, this block on exports to any country that's got a better, faster rollout of vaccine to their population. There's talk of a peace deal last night, but that is still on the cards and being discussed by EU leaders today. What chance do you think that there won't be a ban on exports from EU countries of privately purchased and contracted vaccines to the UK?
Well, look, they've been very clear that companies should fulfil their contracts, and I hope that's what happens. Look, I think for the EU, the most important thing is that everyone is protected from this virus. I think they would be better focused on dealing with the large number of people in their countries who are hesitant about taking a vaccine. They've got millions of doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine, for example, currently being stored in fridges. I think they should work out how to get those vaccines out into people's arms and protect more European citizens from COVID. And that's in their interest, but it's also in our interest. You mentioned about, going abroad. It's not in our interest if significant countries in Europe have unvaccinated populations. So I hope they put their focus on getting the vaccine rolled out rather than on this vaccine nationalism, which will ultimately serve nobody.
And just finally, if they did decide to block exports of vaccines which we have purchased, and again, bearing in mind AstraZeneca jabs of actual ones which our country developed at Oxford University, should we retaliate? The lipid production in Yorkshire that goes into the Pfizer vaccine in Europe, should we retaliate and block exports of that?
Well, I think at this point, I think the Prime Minister should continue doing what he's been doing, which is focusing on getting the Europeans to make the right decision.
Okay.
Ultimately, if we end up with a trade war on this, there won't be any winners. There will just be some losers.
Okay, Mark Harper, thank you very much indeed. Good luck on the vote tonight. He's the chair of the COVID Recovery Group of MPs. Let's get straight into our first guest of this hour, Steve Baker, Deputy Chair of the Coronavirus Recovery Group of Backbench Tory MPs. Good morning to you, Steve.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, lots to talk about. Let's start with the pubs. Boris Johnson, casual conversation almost at the liaison committee yesterday, where he's talking about actually, pub landlords may want to introduce COVID passports to require proof at the door of people having had their COVID vaccination before they allow people to enter. Do you think that this is desirable? Do you think this is ethical? And do you think it's practical?
No, I absolutely don't. In fact, Boris Johnson said that we weren't likely to have to show papers to go to the pub. He was very dismissive of the idea. Nadeem Zahawi, the vaccines minister, told me on the record that he was against, and he also appealed to businesses not to do it. So I think what we're now seeing is the government rolling the pitch to introduce a system of papers for the pub, papers to go to a football match. It will be the theatre, it will be cinemas, it will be restaurants, it will be whatever. You need to buzz in as you go. I mean, this is from a party which opposed ID cards, and this will be a system far, far worse than having an ID card in your pocket. I mean, in our country, we once used to understand that people could go about their lawful business without proving who they were as they went through the door. The reality is that we've very nearly vaccinated vulnerable people. By the time we've done groups 1 to 9, that will be the people who account for 99% of deaths. So we have a serious disease we've got to learn to live with. But what I would say is let's not surrender all our values as we learn to live with it.
And this is the thing, isn't it? Is we're told the vaccination is the route out and will make us all safe and as safe as possibly can be, stop people from not just dying but getting to hospitalised treatment and not spreading the infection around so much as well. And yet we're told that we have to live with non-stop a need to prove our vaccine status and to prove our COVID status with testing of children, of workplaces, going into the pub and the cinema, football grounds. Either the vaccination works or it doesn't. We've been told it does work, which is why everyone should take it. So why would we need anything else other than simply the vaccine? Well,
So I don't want to make the case for the government for them. I believe we don't need vaccine passports and we don't need regular testing to go about our ordinary life. But what they're saying to us is because a small proportion of people won't take the vaccine and because a small proportion of those who have had the vaccine still remain vulnerable, that's a problem for the NHS. But it's a pity they weren't explaining that to us sooner, because actually the goalposts do now keep shifting. And the shifting of the goalposts is really alarming people. I mean, it's no wonder that we've got daft conspiracy theories taking off when the government keeps doing this. But what the government now needs to start explaining is how they think this system will work. They've now said, don't worry, you won't need to be vaccinated. You can have 2 tests. Well, OK, so you'd have, a test on Tuesday, a test on Thursday, and then apply to the government for a freedom pass to go out on a Friday night to the pub. I mean, is that really the country we want to be? I don't think so. And I think once it becomes clear to people how this system would work, and that actually if you just decided spontaneously that you wanted to go on a day when you didn't have a freedom pass and couldn't get one because you hadn't had 2 tests 2 days apart, I think people will quickly decide they don't like this system, not one bit.
I like to think that the common sense that we used to rely on to decide a lot of these things will actually override this. Indeed. Well, let's hope common sense also works when it comes to the EU vaccine export ban. We're told that there's been a bit of a climb down, a bit of a rapprochement after the European Commission got some grief from their own member states. We've got the European Council leaders meeting today to discuss whether or not there should be this export ban. It's not directed at just Britain, we're told. It's just any country that has a much better rollout of the vaccine, which is pretty much everywhere, it would appear, than Europe at the moment. They could keep the vaccines for themselves. Do you think that in the event that we do have some sort of export ban on either Pfizer or AstraZeneca vaccines coming into the UK from the EU countries, that we should retaliate?
Well, it's inconceivable that the Prime Minister would find himself in a position where he could do nothing. But we really don't want to get into this position. So I welcome the declaration that's now been made jointly. I think the EU was on the cusp of making a really terrible mistake. They're effectively offering to seize private property in the EU and overthrow contract law. A lawyer in my constituency, Stephen Barrett, has written on The Spectator about this today. And if people want to look at my Twitter feed, they'll find a link. He's explained that this is something very dangerous for the EU to be basically offering to seize private property. If companies were asking a lawyer, could we safely do business in the EU, lawyers wouldn't know how to answer the question once the EU goes down that path. So it's no wonder they've had backlash from member states. But I really don't want us to be in a position where we're talking about trade wars. We've entered into an agreement with the EU, which is a good quality partnership agreement, which should lead to free trade and friendly cooperation. And that's what I'm looking forward to. I do know some of the ambassadors from EU member states in the UK. They're all reasonable people. And I know that they want their countries to have productive relationships with the UK. So I really hope that common sense and goodwill prevails in all of these matters.
Okay. And well, we've spoken a bit about mission creep to things like COVID passports and the like, but we've also seen 3 weeks to flatten the curve. This time a year ago turned into the third lockdown. I mean, we're still best part of 3 months away from supposedly the first date we can have proper freedom. And yet today there's going to be a vote in the House of Commons to extend the government's Coronavirus Act and their emergency powers all the way to the end of October. Let me just read you something that Ross Clark from The Spectator wrote. He actually wrote this in the Telegraph yesterday. He wrote, "The Prime Minister once said that his hero was the mayor in Jaws because he kept the beaches open. No longer. If this government faced a shark attack, it would not only close the beaches for good, but also the promenade and indeed the entire seaside resort, just in case a new variant of shark evolved, capable of waddling out of the water and gobbling people up some distance inland." Is that the territory we're in?
Well, I'm afraid it does seem to be the territory that we're in, yes. And that's a very interesting metaphor. Of course, viruses evolve rather faster than sharks. But, we do have to continue to engage seriously with scientific advice. But your listeners will know that a year ago, scientists were telling us that the public shouldn't wear masks and that we didn't need to cancel mass gatherings. Now we fast forward, there are plenty of papers around which seem to support both those measures, but which seem to suggest that much more restrictive non-pharmaceutical interventions, as they call them, things like closing the pubs and the restaurants, which have invested to be COVID secure, doesn't actually do much good, and certainly doesn't seem to do enough good to warrant the harm of closing them. So we know that public health professionals have come to the House of Commons, or rather come by Zoom, and told us that no, restaurants weren't a big threat for propagating the disease. But here we are still looking at restaurants and hotels and so on closed at Easter, a major time of the year for them, really prejudicial to the well-being and life chances of their employees not to be able to go to work and earn their own living. So, yeah, it's watching the goalpost shift throughout the year has been very difficult. I accept that people have all learned things as they've gone. Who knows what pressures the Prime Minister is under. But, I do expect the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, a Conservative Prime Minister, to stand up for freedom. So it's going to be very tricky for Boris Johnson to explain why so many of the things he's said over the years about freedom and about identity cards and so on are now seeming to go out of the window in the face of a vaccinated population who should now be able to go about their lives with some sensible precautions, but otherwise very much back to normal. So I'm quite sure if Boris Johnson was a backbencher, he'd be one of our leading voices in the COVID recovery group. So it's a pity that we're where we are.
Yeah, indeed. I think, the Boris Johnson from almost a year ago would have been joining you on that vote as well. 9:17 is the time. Huge thanks to Steve Baker, Deputy Chair of the Coronavirus Recovery Group. Appreciate you joining us as always.